My next guest is a fellow Arkansan, and he serves the state's 4th District in the House of Representatives. He's the leading expert in Congress on forestry, farming, and environmental policy, having earned his master's degree in forestry at Yale University. Yale. Hey, we won't hold that against him, okay? Would you please welcome a good friend, Congressman Bruce Westerman. It is great having you here, Congressman, and I want to start by talking about something your committee is dealing with. You're the chairman of the Natural Resources Committee. There is talk that the national parks may be turned into tent cities for illegals. Is that real?
Well, unfortunately, Governor, it's not just talk. It's happening. It's happening in New York City. It happened last fall when one of those big mouth mayors you were talking about, Eric Adams from New York, Governor Hochul from New York, started reaching out to the Biden administration saying, we've got to have help. We've filled up all of our hotels. We're putting migrants in, and we need space. And as you know, space is not very available in New York, except for a place called Floyd Bennett Field, which is a unit of the National Park Service. 1 million people a year recreate there. The Biden administration went warp speed, waived all the environmental laws, and built a huge tent city right in the middle of Floyd Bennett Field.
So the people that would have gone there for recreation and to enjoy a national park now cannot go. The people who pay the taxes that pay for that, because people who shouldn't have been allowed into the country are living there.
In massive tent cities where they process 2,000 to 3,000 at a time through these tents. And another problem, that field floods occasionally, and you may have noticed a few weeks ago, there was some strong winds and cold weather, and they took the migrants and put them in actually Chuck Schumer's high school and sent the students home for remote learning while they sheltered them at the high school while the storm passed.
You know, if I'm a parent in New York and my kid is sent home, can't go to school, is said, we're going to disrupt your child's learning because we're going to take some people who illegally came to the country and we're going to feed them there, house them there, I might have a little bit of a problem with that.
You know, when you were governor of our great state, that might have created a little bit of problem had the situation arose like that.
I guarantee you it would have created a problem.
And you know, it's bipartisan dislike for this. We actually had a Democrat assemblywoman from New York come to D.C. and testify on our committee on this. So people are fed up with it all across the country. It has become not just the southern border, it's all of America is a sanctuary city now. You know, going back to Arkansas, about 2 million people population. Since Joe Biden's been president, 4 times the population of Arkansas has come into our country illegally. Think about, you know, all the houses, all the services, everything that it takes for the whole state of Arkansas, and you've got that 4 times burden added to our country now.
But he says it's your fault. It's Congress's fault. It's the Republicans specifically. It's you guys that won't help him out here and work with him. Funny, it was working just fine. He took office and he undid everything that had been working.
Well, you've seen Democrat playbooks before. You know, they create a problem, they blame somebody else for it, and then they try to go back and fix the problem they created. So we're at that stage, they're trying to blame somebody else for the problem they created. And, you know, Joe Biden has proactively, he did away with the executive orders that President Trump had, the Remain in Mexico policy. Not only did he stop construction of the border wall, started tearing the wall down. You know, tax dollars had been spent to build the wall. They started tearing it down. It's almost like since President Trump did it, they just hate it so bad they're going to do the opposite, and you can see where it's got us.
If Trump had created running water, they would have shut it down and said, you're going to have to walk 6 miles down to the creek and take a 5-gallon jug. I mean, it's insane. You know, Congressman, I don't think most people fully appreciate, especially if they're urban dwellers, how important the natural resources of our country are, the forests, the soil, the lands. Without it, we don't have food. We don't get to live. And that's a committee that you oversee. Tell us in the big picture, why is that such an important part of America?
Well, it's the necessity of life. It's food, clothing, and shelter. It's energy. It's those things that we literally can't live without. And I think that was highlighted during the pandemic. You know, if truckers had stayed home and not moved goods from the farm to the stores, I think we would have seen catastrophes much larger than anything from the pandemic. But people forget that it's our resources that not only provide the things to allow us to live, but it's also where wealth comes from by utilizing those resources. You know, a fellow Yale forester, probably a more left-leaning guy, a guy named Aldo Leopold, he said there are two great spiritual tragedies when someone thinks that food comes from the grocery and heat comes from the furnace. And we're in a country where a lot of people, especially urban dwellers, don't realize when they go to the grocery store, when they hit the light switch, there's a huge supply chain behind that.
And if it weren't for the farmers and the ranchers of the country who love the environment, quite frankly, a whole lot more than some of these.
The original environmentalists.
They really are, because their livelihood depends upon it. And I think that's lost on so many people on the left who claim they love the environment, but they do nothing to actually care for it. Let's take, for example, wildfires. They're horrible in the western part of the United States. We don't see it so much in middle America. Why?
Because we manage our forest, for one thing. You do have warmer, drier climates in the West. You know, speaking of that, we've lost 20% of our giant sequoias. Without going into a lot of detail, it's hard to kill a sequoia tree with fire. They're made, God made them to survive fire. Some of them are 3,000 years old, but because of poor management decisions, in a 2-year period, we lost 20% of them. And these are the only giant sequoias on the planet. And we still can't get our colleagues on the other side of the aisle and in the White House to do the right thing and even manage in the giant sequoias so that we can have them for the future.
And when you're talking about managing, you're talking about sometimes cutting trees helps you to have more trees. I know that may sound illogical to some people, but you know, the people that say, don't cut a tree, don't ever cut a tree. They're sustainable, they're renewable, but if you don't cut a tree, you end up creating an absolute mess for a fire.
Fire cuts the tree for you. So I say we love our trees to death. We don't want to take care of them and discipline them and thin them out, and eventually fire comes along. And forests are they're biological living organisms, and they compete for light, they compete for water, and they compete for nutrients. And when they reach the limit on that, somebody's got to go.
So is there more forest now in the United States than there was 100 years ago or 200 years ago?
Yeah, there's more forest in the United States than there was at the turn of in 1900. And we lose more forest now because of development, not because of forest management practices. And that's not true every place in the world. But we've got such a wonderful resource that we've been blessed with here, and we should be better stewards of it and take care of it so that it'll be here for the future.
What is the message that is not getting through to not just members of Congress, but to the average citizen about taking care of our land and preserving it and protecting it and being able to pass it on to the next generation?
And I like to use the word conservation, and it means being a good steward. You hear this word preservation, and preservation's for art. I say preservation's for pickles. You take a cucumber, boil it in vinegar, and put it in a jar. That's the only way you can preserve living things, and you kill them. So we've got to keep these forests alive and healthy, thinning, controlled burns, and just giving them an opportunity to provide great water quality. Theodore Roosevelt called them the lungs of the earth. They breathe in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen. So you get air quality, wildlife habitat. Everybody wins with a healthy forest, but we just have to give them a chance to be healthy.
Does it worry you that countries like China are trying to buy up land in the United States? And why on earth would the Chinese try to buy up farmland in this country?
Well, and it's more than farmland. We just were able to stop something last week. The New York Stock Exchange and the Securities and Exchange Commission were trying to promulgate a rule that would allow something called a natural asset company to be traded on the stock exchange. So people from all over the world could invest in these natural asset companies, and they were working with the Biden administration to go in and lease up federal land to, quote, conserve it, but what they're really going to do is try to preserve it, restrict access to it. So if you're communist China, you could invest in one of these asset companies, go buy a lease where we had, say, cobalt or nickel or copper, and forever prohibit it from being mined because they control the world's minerals and elements. And as we push towards a an electrified economy, you've got to have those minerals and elements, so it makes us more dependent on China. When we do unsmart things like say we're not going to export liquefied natural gas, that plays to Vladimir Putin's hands because it raises the price of gas and helps him to fund the war in Ukraine. When we say we're going to put up all these windmills and solar farms, that plays to China's hands because they control the market on that. Why don't we make things here in America? Why don't we use the resources we've got? We use them more efficiently and effectively, and we're better stewards than anybody else on the planet. But it's kind of a not in my backyard mentality.
Congressman, you keep talking like that with some common sense, they'll throw you out of Washington. You won't belong up there anymore.
You know, Governor, I studied engineering in undergraduate school and forestry in graduate school, and I often tell people I've got the two worst educational backgrounds to serve in Congress because engineers think with logic and reason, and foresters look at long-term horizons, and that's really not appreciated in D.C. that much.
But for gosh sake, please stay there, Congressman. We need you there. Thank you for what you're doing for all of us in America, not just the 4th District of Arkansas. If you want to keep up with Congressman Westerman, his Committee on Natural Resources, and the work that he's doing to promote forest management, which we need, links to him are available at Huckabee.tv that will connect you directly with him. You might be surprised at how much importance there is in the natural resources for your life. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I hope you will now. The button is just below this video, and there's a little bell next to it. If you click on those, YouTube will reluctantly start letting you know when we've got a new video uploaded.